today's episode, I wanted to talk about agreements that you make with an alcoholic sociopath, or specifically agreements that I made with my alcoholic sociopath. So the agreement that we're going to be discussing and then the situation that unfolded was to do with him drinking. Now, looking back, obviously I can go, you can't make agreements with regards to drinking. It doesn't work. They're never going to stick to it. It's always going to unfold, and they're going to go against it, and they're going to start drinking again and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, keep in mind that I believe when this particular incident occurred, I was 21. I had very little idea about alcoholism and the effect that has on people and how that plays out and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I was very young, but the situation that happened was also quite dramatic. So what happened was we were going to a party, but before we were to head off to the party, I went to see a friend of mine, and my alcoholic sociopath was at home with somebody else. So he was having a couple of drinks. So as I left to go and see my friend, I just said to him, make sure you don't get drunk because we're going to this party, remember? And we're going by motorbike. So, we need to get there safely. So my alcoholic sociopath was like, yep, no worries, have fun, see you in an hour or two. So when I got home from having seen my friend, we essentially I just gathered up our stuff. I got changed. I didn't have a lot of attention on him. We got our gear on and hopped on the bike. Now, I mean, there are so many things. There are so many aspects of this story that were just not right. For example, I was in a dress, no protective gear at all. I think even the jacket I was wearing wasn't actually like a motorbike jacket. I did have a helmet on, but I had bare legs. Maybe I had boots on, that might have protected me a little bit if we had an accident. But yeah, so we got ready, and I had no pockets, so I had some money with me. So I had put my money into his pocket, his front pocket. So we jumped on the bike and off we went down the road. So as he rode along, I became aware that he actually couldn't even ride the bike in a straight line. He was all over the road, which alerted me to the fact that he was drunk. And at the time I was stuck. I was like, I'm on the back of a bike with a man who's drunk. What do I do? And my money was in his pocket. So my first thought was I started ferreting around in his pocket, which was pretty hard because he was, riding a bike. And I started looking for my money so that when I got off the bike, I had a means of getting back home. So as I ferreted, it took me ages. And then, I don't even understand, but we ended up going over the harbour bridge. We lived in Bondi at the time, and there seemed to be no red lights. My plan was to jump off the bike when we got to the next red light and, slap him around a bit, tell him how rude this was, and then just go home. But before I knew it, we were on the harbour bridge. Where we were going was in Kirribilli. So I remember as we got onto the harbour bridge, I looked at the cityscape and Sydney Harbour, and I remember closing my eyes and thinking, if I die tonight, I die tonight. I have to be okay with that. And my alcoholic sociopath put me in that position where I had to be okay with the concept of dying, because I was on the back of the bike with, and someone who was drunk. So in the end, we got to our destination, and I got off the bike and I took off my helmet and he took off his helmet, and I looked at him and I said, "You can fuck with your own life, but don't you dare fuck with mine." And he was like, "Oh, what are you on about?" And I was like, "Mate, you're drunk and you just drove drunk with me on the back of the bike. How dare you?" And so he then got angry and he rode away and into the night and left me in Kirribilli. I had no idea how to get home, but I worked it out eventually. And so by the time I got home, I was, he wasn't there. So then came the worry and the stress about the fact that he was riding his bike drunk, and he wasn't there. So therefore, what happened to him? And I went through that whole process and started walking the streets, going to local pubs, seeing if I could find him, all that sort of stuff. And then eventually, I think at probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, he rocked up. He had a scar on his face, and he'd had an accident. He'd, slid underneath a car, sustained quite bad gravel rash on the side of his body. He said that he was at hospital, but he kept telling them he just wanted to be stitched up and let go, and they were taking too long. So then he said, "If you don't stitch me up now, I'll go home and do it myself." So they did it, but they did it quite badly. Like, they did it rushed. And so by the time he got home, he had a very roughly stitched up face, and still had all the gravel in his arm from having come off the bike. And I then got to experience him hop into the shower and use a scrubbing brush to scrub his own wound and get all the gravel out. And I almost passed out. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. I don't know if that's the numbness of alcohol or, what enables someone to do something like that, but that was pretty full on. Anyway, as a part of this whole thing, obviously at this point, I was like, I don't want this in my life. This is not me. I don't need an alcoholic in my life. I don't want an alcoholic in my life. I grew up with an alcoholic, and that was enough for me. And I told him as much. I said, I don't, the next day, of course, I don't want this in my life. This is not part of, my idea of the perfect life for myself. So essentially, I said to him, I can't be with you, and I don't want to be with you. And his response to that was, well, I don't want to lose you, so I'm going to give up drinking. And that was, it got me. I believed him. And I'm like, is it that easy? And he's like, yep, it's that easy. I'm not a drinker anymore. I'm not drinking. You're important in my life. I want you to be here, and I want to keep you with me. So I'm no longer drinking. And so that was one of our first agreements, or our first major agreement. It was before babies. It was, he and I just at the beginning of that journey together. And, obviously I should have gone, but I believed him. And so what happened to that agreement? What was the end result of making this agreement of I'll stop drinking? So not long after that, I got pregnant with our first child. And I decided that I was going to have this baby. It suddenly felt very maternal for some reason. So I had my first baby at the age of 22. But when I was about 6 months pregnant, I was out and about doing something or other. And I got home, and he had some people come around, and he was maggoted. He had been drinking all afternoon. And this was the first time in 6 months. So I was quite pregnant at the time. And yeah, and I went up to him and I said, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "We have an agreement with regards to your drinking." And he looked at me, and this was the thing, right? And this is the thing that happened over and over in our relationship. He looked at me and he went, "What agreement? I don't remember making an agreement with you about drinking. What are you talking about?" And because it was the first time, because I had never experienced this gaslighting before, this feeling of being completely um, made to feel insane, thinking that I knew what the reality of the situation was, and then being told that my reality was not real, it was incredible. And I spiraled at that point. At 6 months pregnant, I spiraled into this deep, deep hole of depression, and it took me years and years and years to crawl out of that hole. And in therapy and all that sort of stuff later on, it was really, for me, it was the beginning. It was the first nail in my coffin. It was the thing that pinned me down and made me feel like I couldn't move, and made me feel like I was in a cage and that I was stuck and that there was nothing I could do to change my situation. And I guess that was probably the desired result of my alcoholic sociopath. That feeling of being unable to change a situation, and so then I was stuck. And from then on, it was very hard for me to try and leave because I was in a hole, and I was stuck in that hole for quite some time. So yeah, so that's a story. That's a story about making agreements with alcoholic sociopaths, or maybe just alcoholics, or maybe just sociopaths. As I've said before, I don't know which bit affected mine more, whether it was the alcoholism or the sociopath, but I had the combination of the two. Stay strong. Speak again soon.